The moon was silent as it always had been. Its pock-marked surface stretched endlessly, the shadows of ancient craters casting long, eerie lines beneath the harsh glow of the sun. The team's lander, Aegis 1, had touched down just hours before on the far side, a region seldom explored by humanity. Dr. Elena Vargas stood at the observation window of the base module, her breath fogging the glass as she stared at the expanse of gray dust and jagged rock. Something felt off about this place. She couldn't quite explain it, but it was as if the moon itself was holding its breath. "Elena, you're going to want to see this." Commander J. Lin's voice crackled over the comms, breaking her reverie. His tone carried something rare for him, excitement edged with unease. Elena grabbed her helmet and exited the module, her boots crunching against the lunar soil as she followed the faint beacon marking the commander's location. The rest of the team was already gathered, their suits stark white against the infinite black of space. She could see the glint of light reflecting off something unnatural ahead, something too perfect, too symmetrical to belong here. As she approached, her breath caught. Rising from the ground was a structure unlike anything they had expected. At first glance, it looked like an obsidian monolith, but as she drew nearer, she realized its surface shimmered subtly, like black liquid frozen mid-motion. No seams, no ridges, no signs of wear or erosion from the harsh lunar environment. It was alien. There was no mistaking that. "How did we miss this on satellite scans?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "Because it doesn't reflect light," Lin replied, kneeling to inspect the base of the structure. "Or at least not in any way we understand. The material absorbs nearly everything." "Any guesses on its age?" asked Roy Patel, the team's medic and geologist. He reached out tentatively, his gloved hand hovering just above the surface. "Could be millions of years," Lin said. "Hell, it could predate the moon itself." As Roy's hand made contact, the structure responded. A faint ripple spread across its surface, and a low hum began to vibrate through the ground. Elena felt it in her bones, a pulsing rhythm that wasn't sound so much as sensation. She stepped back instinctively. "Careful," she warned, but it was too late. A seam appeared in the monolith, a hairline fracture that widened into a doorway. Beyond, darkness yawned, punctuated only by a faint, pulsing blue light emanating from deep within. No one spoke for a moment, the enormity of the discovery rendering them speechless. Finally, Lin broke the silence. "Whatever this is, we're going in." The interior was colder than the lunar surface, which shouldn't have been possible. Their suit sensors struggled to adapt, reporting anomalous readings as the team descended a winding, metallic ramp that seemed to form itself beneath their feet. The walls shimmered faintly, alive with shifting patterns of light that danced in alien geometries. Elena's scientific mind tried to make sense of it, but there was no reference point, nothing to compare it to. It was like trying to describe a color you'd never seen before. Then they reached the first chamber. It was vast, larger than it could possibly be given the exterior dimensions. Hundreds, maybe thousands of glowing orbs hovered in midair, suspended as though gravity had no meaning here. Each orb was about the size of a human head, their translucent surfaces swirling with faint inner light. Elena approached one cautiously, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch it. The moment her glove made contact, the orb activated. A cascade of images flooded her mind, vivid and overwhelming. A child playing by a riverside, an old man painting beneath a setting sun, a soldier crying out in the chaos of battle. Each scene felt real, as though she were there, living those moments herself. She staggered back, gasping for breath. "What is it?" Lynn asked, his voice sharp. "They're memories," she managed to say. "Human memories." Roy touched another orb, and his reaction was the same. "This one. I saw someone building a temple. It was ancient, but not like anything from Earth's history." "This changes everything," Elena whispered. But her awe was tinged with unease. Where had these memories come from? Who had collected them, and why? As they moved further into the chamber, it became clear that the orbs weren't random. They were arranged in rows, like files in a library. Each glowed faintly, their light pulsating in unison with the rhythmic hum that now seemed to come from everywhere at once. At the far end of the chamber, they found a console, if it could be called that. A raised platform of the same shimmering material as the walls, it pulsed with an almost biological rhythm, veins of light coursing through it like blood. "Who built this?" Lynn asked, more to himself than anyone else. "It's not human," Elena replied, her voice tight. "But they've been watching us for a long time." Her words hung heavy in the air as the realization sank in. This was not a museum. It was something far stranger, far more deliberate. A repository of lives, a record of humanity's essence. But for what purpose? Behind them, the entrance sealed itself with a quiet hiss, plunging the chamber into an unsettling stillness. The faint hum grew louder, resonating in their skulls. And then, for the first time, they heard it, a sound that wasn't a sound at all. A low, guttural vibration that seemed to come from deep within the structure itself. It wasn't mechanical, it was alive. The deeper they descended, the more the structure seemed to close in around them. The walls, once smooth and unbroken, began to shift subtly, like the twitch of a muscle beneath skin. The air, though impossible in a vacuum, felt heavier, pressing against their suits with a palpable weight. Every step into the bowels of the archive was accompanied by a low, wet sound, like something breathing in the unseen depths. "Does anyone else feel that?" Roy asked, his voice crackling over the comms. "Feel what?" Lynn snapped, though his tension was evident. "The walls," Roy replied, swallowing hard. "It's like they're moving." Elena paused, brushing her gloved hand across the surface nearest her. It was cold, unnaturally so, but smooth and solid. Yet when she pressed her palm against it, she could feel something beneath. A vibration. A pulse. Her stomach turned. "It's alive," she whispered. Ahead of them, the passage opened into another chamber, but this one was different. It was vast, cavernous, the ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. The walls were lined with the same glowing orbs, but here they pulsed erratically, their light dimming and flaring as if reacting to the team's presence. In the center of the room was a pit, circular and deep, its edges lined with the same black, liquid-like material as the entrance. Elena stepped closer, peering over the edge. She saw movement. Not a single discernible form, but a writhing mass like a nest of serpents squirming over one another. Her mind struggled to process the sight. It wasn't serpents, it wasn't anything she could identify. It was flesh, raw, sinewy, and pulsating. Veins like rivers of molten light coursed through it, pumping an unknown substance in rhythmic surges. The air, or what passed for it, carried a sickly sweet odor, cloying and invasive. "Elena," Lynn said sharply, pulling her back. "Don't get too close." "What is it?" Roy asked, but no one had an answer. Then it moved. The mass in the pit shifted, rising slowly, painfully, as if dragging itself from a deep sleep. At first it was amorphous, a shapeless blob of tissue and light. Then it began to form, limbs unfolded, long and thin, tipped with claw-like protrusions. A torso emerged, grotesquely elongated, its surface translucent enough to reveal the internal workings of alien anatomy. Veins and organs pulsed within, a sick parody of life. Its head, or what could be called a head, was a nightmare. It was a mosaic of faces shifting constantly, human faces. A child's wide, curious eyes melded into the screaming visage of a man. A woman's serene expression twisted into a grotesque grin before vanishing entirely. Each face flickered for mere seconds before being replaced by another, as though the creature was cycling through the memories stored in the archive. It let out a sound then, a guttural, wet gurgle that resonated in their bones. It wasn't speech, but it carried intent. Hunger. Rage. "Back up," Lin ordered, raising his weapon. But the creature moved faster than any of them could react. A limb shot out, striking Roy before he could even scream. The appendage pierced his suit with ease, sinking into his torso. For a moment he was still, his eyes wide with shock. Then his body began to change. The transformation was horrifyingly rapid. The tissue around the wound darkened, spreading outward like ink in water. His skin bubbled and split, revealing raw alien muscle beneath. His screams turned guttural, inhuman, as his limbs elongated and twisted into grotesque shapes. Within seconds, Roy was no longer recognizable as human. "Move," Lin shouted, pulling Elena away as the creature retracted its limb, leaving what was once Roy to collapse to the floor. But he didn't stay there. The mass of tissue that had been their teammate twitched, then rose, its movements jerky and unnatural. It turned toward them, its face, or what was left of it, shifting in grotesque mimicry of emotions. Pain, fear, rage. "Roy?" Elena whispered, though she knew it wasn't him anymore. The creature lunged again, but this time Lin fired, the sharp crack of his weapon echoing through the chamber. The shot hit its mark, splattering the creature's flesh across the floor, but it didn't slow. If anything, it seemed to adapt, its form solidifying, its movements becoming more coordinated. "We have to go," Elena shouted, grabbing Lin's arm. They sprinted back toward the corridor, the sound of pursuit, wet, slithering, and fast, echoing behind them. The chamber seemed to respond to their retreat, the walls undulating as if urging them forward, or perhaps herding them toward something worse. As they reached the corridor, the entrance sealed shut behind them with a deafening crash. The hum of the structure grew louder, more insistent, as though the entire archive was coming alive. "Roy's gone," Lin said, his voice tight with grief. "We can't let it follow us." "What was that thing?" Elena asked, panting as they hurried through the twisting corridors. "I think," Lin said grimly, "it's what this place was trying to keep out. Or keep in." Ahead of them, the path forked, one side leading back to the entrance, the other deeper into the structure. The hum was louder now, almost deafening, as though the archive itself was reacting to their presence, or to the creature's awakening. Lin hesitated, glancing back at the sealed door behind them. "If we go back, we might lead it out. We need to end this here." Elena nodded, her fear warring with her resolve. Whatever this place was, whatever secrets it held, they couldn't let that thing escape. Not to Earth, not anywhere. The decision made, they turned and headed deeper into the dark, toward the unknown. The archive's core was not a room, but a vast, circular expanse that seemed to stretch beyond the limits of the structure itself. Elena's breath caught as she stepped inside. The floor beneath her feet shimmered like liquid metal, rippling faintly with each step. The walls curved endlessly upward, a glowing lattice of alien glyphs spiraling toward a distant point of light at the apex. At the center of the space, a column of organic material pulsed rhythmically, its translucent surface alive with branching veins that carried an iridescent, viscous substance. The hum that had followed them since their arrival was deafening here, a relentless vibration that seemed to sync with their heartbeats. Elena felt a faint pressure in her skull, a presence pushing against the edges of her mind. It wasn't just noise, it was something else. "Do you feel that?" Lynn asked, his voice hushed. His normally commanding demeanor was frayed, his eyes darting between the shifting glyphs and the central column. Elena nodded, her hand trembling as she activated her scanner. The readings were incomprehensible, the device struggling to process the sheer magnitude of energy radiating from the chamber. "It's alive," she whispered. "This whole place is alive." The console at the base of the column flickered, its surface shifting to display images, fragments of something vast, something ancient. The glyphs rearranged themselves into recognizable forms, star systems, alien figures, and finally, humanity. The images moved too quickly to follow, but Elena's mind grasped at the pieces, assembling them into a narrative that chilled her to her core. "They've been watching us," she said, her voice barely audible, "for millions of years." The images slowed, resolving into a scene that left no room for misinterpretation. A barren Earth, lifeless and hostile, before a shimmering alien vessel descended through the atmosphere. It hovered over the primordial landscape, releasing something, small, faintly glowing spores that drifted downward and embedded themselves into the planet's surface. "This isn't a record of us," Elena said, her voice trembling. "It's a record of them. They didn't just observe humanity, they created it." Lynn stared at the projection, his jaw tightening. "What are you saying? That we're some kind of experiment?" Elena didn't respond, her attention fixed on the unfolding story. The spores gave rise to life, their influence shaping evolution, accelerating progress. Humanity's ancestors emerged, their DNA intertwined with something alien. The images grew darker, more disturbing. Primitive humans herded like livestock, their bodies altered, augmented. Screams echoed faintly through the chamber, not from the projection, but from somewhere deep within the structure itself. The final images revealed the architects of the archive, a tall insectoid species with elongated limbs and multifaceted eyes. They moved with an unsettling grace, their translucent bodies pulsing with light. They were scientists, engineers, collectors. Their civilizations spanned galaxies, their technology a blend of organic and mechanical precision. But their perfection was their downfall. As the images continued, the narrative shifted. Internal conflicts erupted among the alien race, their experiments spiraling out of control. The bioorganic systems they had created, creatures like the ones stalking the team, turned on them. The archive was their last effort, a desperate attempt to preserve their knowledge and memories before their species was wiped out. "And now it's all here," Lynn said bitterly, gesturing to the column. "All their mistakes, all their horrors." Elena moved closer to the console, her hands trembling as she navigated its shifting surface. The glyphs responded to her touch, revealing more fragments of data. It wasn't just knowledge of their own species that the aliens had stored here. The archive contained the sum total of everything they had collected. Thousands of civilizations catalogued, dissected, and ultimately destroyed. Her breath caught as she saw Earth among them, its blue and green surface rendered in stark detail. Next to it, another glyph appeared, a sequence of DNA overlaid with annotations in the alien script. "They engineered us," Elena said, her voice hollow. "Not just to observe us, but to control us. There's something in our DNA, a failsafe, a way to trigger something." Lin stepped forward, his expression grim. "Trigger what?" Before she could respond, the console flickered again, showing something new. A diagram of the creature they had encountered. It was labeled in alien glyphs, but the meaning was clear. Guardian Protocol. "They made it to protect the archive," Elena said, the realization dawning on her. "But it's not just a guardian, it's a backup. If the archive were ever compromised, it would convert, assimilate life forms to rebuild the data. That's what happened to Roy. And it'll happen to us if we don't stop it," Lin said, gripping his weapon. Elena stared at the central column, its pulsing veins speeding up as if responding to their presence. The knowledge stored here was unimaginable, technology that could end disease, colonize worlds, reshape the future of humanity. But it came with a cost. This place wasn't just a repository. It was a prison for a species that had destroyed itself. "We can't let this leave the moon," she said. "If we bring this back to Earth, we'll be repeating their mistakes." Lin hesitated, his eyes locked on the column. "We could end wars with this. We could save lives. Are you really suggesting we destroy it?" Elena turned to him, her expression resolute. "If we don't, it'll destroy us first." As if in answer, the hum deepened, a low, guttural vibration that shook the chamber. The walls began to ripple, shifting as though alive, and from the far side of the room came a sound that froze them both. The wet, slithering approach of the creature. It had found them, and it wasn't alone. The creature loomed in the entrance of the chamber, its translucent flesh illuminated by the flickering glyphs on the walls. Behind it, two others shambled into view, grotesque amalgamations of what had once been human. Roy's twisted form was unmistakable among them, his face a shifting mask of agony and rage. They moved as one, driven by an intelligence far beyond their own, and their gaze locked on Elena and Lin. "We don't have time," Lin shouted, snapping Elena out of her paralysis. The console in the center of the room flared with light, the glyphs rearranging themselves into symbols she couldn't understand but instinctively felt were a warning. The structure was responding to the creature's presence, or perhaps their pursuit of the knowledge it contained. The central column pulsed faster, its veins glowing an angry red, as though the archive itself were alive and panicking. "They're connected to it," Elena said, her voice trembling. "If they reach the column, they'll consume it," Lin finished grimly. He raised his weapon, his hands steady despite the chaos. "And probably us along with it." The creatures moved faster now, their distorted limbs snapping and twitching as they closed the distance. Lin fired, the chamber erupting with flashes of light and the wet, sickening sound of flesh tearing. One of the creatures fell, its body collapsing into a heap of writhing tissue, but the others barely slowed. Elena stumbled backward, her mind racing. She reached the console, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the glyphs. "There's a way to destroy it," she said, barely able to hear herself over the pounding in her ears. "The column, the archive, it's all connected. If I overload the system, will it stop them?" Lynn shouted, firing again. The creature that had once been Roy let out a guttural screech, its body convulsing but refusing to fall. "It will stop everything," Elena said. Her voice cracked as the weight of her words hit her. "The archive, the knowledge, the history, it'll all be gone." Lynn hesitated, his weapon lowered for a fraction of a second. "Do we have a choice?" Elena's hand hovered over the final sequence. The glyphs shimmered beneath her touch, almost pleading. Images flashed across the console, visions of Earth transformed, its cities gleaming with alien technology, its people free from disease and war. For a moment, she saw herself standing in that world, holding a blueprint for a new humanity in her hands. She could hear voices, whispers of a future that only they could bring to life. Then the whispers turned to screams. The visions shifted, showing Earth consumed by the same horrors they had seen in the archive. Twisted bodies, civilizations collapsing under the weight of their ambition. The creature's grotesque face appeared among the images, a grim reminder of what the archive had already wrought. The future was a double-edged sword, and the choice was theirs to make. "Elena, now!" Lynn's voice snapped her back to the present. The creatures were almost upon them, their bodies convulsing with alien energy. The floor beneath them pulsed violently, the structure itself reacting to the chaos. Her hand slammed down on the console. The glyphs erupted in a cascade of light, the central column flaring brighter than the sun. The creatures screamed, their distorted voices blending into a single, deafening wail. The floor beneath them began to crack, fissures spreading outward as the archive's organic systems unraveled. Lynn grabbed Elena, pulling her away from the console as the room began to collapse. "Run!" he shouted. They sprinted toward the corridor, the ground buckling beneath their feet. Behind them, the creatures writhed in agony, their bodies disintegrating as the archive's energy surged through them. The walls trembled, chunks of alien material falling around them as they stumbled toward the exit. The hum of the archive became a roar, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate the very fabric of reality. As they reached the outer chamber, the structure began to implode, the black, liquid-like walls folding in on themselves. Elena turned back for a moment, her heart aching as the glowing orbs, millions of lives, millions of stories, shattered into nothingness. By the time they reached the surface, the alien structure was gone. The crater was silent once more, its surface marred only by a faint scar where the archive had been. The moon, indifferent to their struggle, stretched out before them in cold, unyielding silence. Elena collapsed onto the ground, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. Lynn stood nearby, staring at the spot where the structure had disappeared. His weapon hung limply in his hand, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "It's over," he said, though his voice carried little conviction. Elena didn't respond. Her mind was numb, her body trembling. She thought of everything they had lost, the knowledge, the potential for a better world. But as she closed her eyes, she saw the creature's face again, its grotesque form a reminder of the cost of that knowledge. "We did the right thing," she said softly, though the words felt hollow. Lynn didn't answer. He turned toward the lander, motioning for her to follow. "Let's go home." As the Aegis One ascended, the The moon shrank beneath them, its surface bathed in the pale light of the distant sun. Elena stared out the window, her mind heavy with questions that would never have answers. They had saved humanity, but at what cost? Could they live with the knowledge that they had destroyed something that could have reshaped the future? Just as the moon disappeared from view, a faint pulse of light flickered across its surface. It was almost imperceptible, but Elena saw it. Her breath caught, a chill running down her spine. Something had survived.